And welcome back into this segment on GameDaySportsRadio.com. It's a Friday morning, and always on Fridays, we got Mike Bernard coming in here for Inside the Numbers. Mike, if you're not a college football fan, this is the weekend to be a college football fan because there are some great games in store this Saturday.
Yeah, we've got 3 games featuring unbeatens, and that's only happened twice ever.
Listen, we've got 15 unbeaten FBS teams right now, and 6 of those are playing each other tomorrow. And as you said, I think you had told me earlier in the week when we were discussing this that the 3 games with teams that are 5-0 or better. It's the last time this occurred was way back in 1993.
Yeah, that's right. And see, 93, you had Florida State was one of them, and but 93, it doesn't seem like a long time, but that's a long time ago.
Yeah, that's like last week for me. So, well, let's jump right into it. We'll start off with number 10, Penn State, going to number 8, Michigan. Not only is it a top 10 matchup, but it is a Big Ten East matchup. Penn State senior quarterback Sean Clifford, he seems like he's been there since we were in grade school. 9 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. For Michigan, sophomore J.J. McCarthy, he won the job over Cade McNamara. He's also has 9 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. Last week, Penn State, they were open, had the week off. The Wolverines struggled early. I don't know how much they were into that game against Indiana. And then also running back coach Mike Hart had a seizure on the sideline during the first half. You know, and those are, regardless of how we look at those guys in this arena, those are young kids. Those are kids that are really affected by things like that. You know, even as adults, we're affected by stuff like that. So you can imagine what it is when it's your coach that has a medical episode like that. Thankfully, he's okay. Mike Hart's back with the team and is expected to be on the sideline tomorrow. But they pulled away late against Indiana. And again, we know that's not uncommon when you've got a big game the next week. Sometimes you look down the road and you're not taking care of your business at hand. But they did. These 2 programs, obviously storied programs, but they never met until Penn State joined the Big Ten back in the early 90s. 25 times they've met. Michigan holds a 15-10 edge. The road team has won the last 2 meetings here. But, Mike, I kind of like Michigan at home right now.
Michigan's the favorite. Penn State, they've lost 9 straight versus top 10 opponents. We wouldn't think that, right? Because James Franklin's done an excellent job. They have some big wins. They went on, I believe, in 2017. They won the Big Ten, and they've had a lot of great teams. But of those 9 straight losses to top 10 opponents, they've covered 7 of their last 10 on the road. So those kind of cancel out. In this series, the favorites covered 7 of the last 8. You talked about Michigan against Indiana. That was a classic look-ahead spot. They were tied at half, and they pulled away late. I'm going to pass on this game. I might lean to under here. It's one of the marquee games. A lot of these marquee games that are on national television, the totals are inflated. The fans are betting over, and it stays under.
Okay, Mike, we're going to move on to number 3, Alabama, at number 6, Tennessee. Now, one of our production assistants just handed me a note and says it is 5,836 days since Tennessee beat Alabama in football. I guess it's right. I'm not a mathematician like you are, but it's been 15, 16 years. So I guess that's about right. Okay. So that's a lot of days.
It is.
But for the first time since 1989, both of these teams come into this game undefeated and ranked in the top 10. For me, this is the best Vols teams. You got to go back to 2004. And this was a team that finished, or the 2004 team, they finished as the SEC East champs with a 10-3 record. Now, they had a stupid loss to Notre Dame, but they lost twice to Auburn in that year, once in the regular season, once in the SEC championship game. And you got to remember that Auburn team, they didn't get a chance to prove it, but they ended up undefeated. They were probably the best team in the nation that year. And to put a period on the end of that sentence for Tennessee in 2004, they went into the Cotton Bowl and they beat Texas A&M by 31 points that year. So a very good football team in 2004 for Tennessee. And again, this is the best team they've had since then. You've got, it all starts with quarterback. Hendon Hooker, I've told you time and time again, both on the air and off the air, this guy does not get the respect and recognition that he deserves. This week, he's getting his top weapon back in wide receiver Cedric Tillman. I think that doesn't bode well for an Alabama secondary who's prone to give up some big plays. Alabama, Bryce Young, will he play? Will he not play? If he does play, how effective can he be? And when you look at this, you look at the history of this rivalry for many, many years, Tennessee was the rival for Alabama. It wasn't Auburn, because you got to remember there was a period of almost 50 years where Alabama and Auburn did not play each other. And both the Tennessee and Alabama programs, they were top notch back then. And they were the big rivals. They first played in 1901. And if you go back and look at the entire series, it's a series of streaks. Starting, let's just go the last 52 years, starting in 1970. Alabama had a streak of 11 starting in 1970. Then Tennessee had a streak of 4. Alabama won 8 out of 9, and the one they didn't win was the last tie that they'll ever be in the series. Then Tennessee wins 10 of 11, and then Bama now has won the last 15. Nick Saban's got a very good track record against the Vols. He is 16-1. He was 1-1 at LSU, in case you're wondering why we say he's never lost to Tennessee at Alabama, but he has lost to Tennessee one game at LSU. There's an electric atmosphere in Knoxville this week. Memories of 1982. And even people who weren't born in 1982, they remember. If you're a Vols fan, you remember 1982, because Alabama comes in ranked second. Neyland Stadium was rocking. At that time, it was the largest crowd ever to see a college football game in person. And the Vols, they got their first win over the Tide in 11 seasons there. But let's be honest, neither one of those two teams was really that special. Alabama was ranked that high based off reputation and what they had done the previous year. Tennessee, they ended up 6-5-1 that year. They lost to the powerhouses of Duke, Georgia Tech, and Vandy that year. And that was Coach Bryant's last Alabama team. They went 8-4, ended the season unranked. You know, all that being said, when I look at this game, Mike, my head just says Tennessee, 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 but my gut says Alabama.
Yeah, and it's kind of those, remember the Florida, Tennessee years in the 90s? Tennessee had all the great teams, and I just kept saying, I can't play Tennessee until I see them beat Florida, and they couldn't for the longest time. You talked about that 04 Tennessee team and losing to that Auburn 04 team that did not get a chance to play in the BCS title game. Of course, Oklahoma got beat 61-19 or something close to that. And that Auburn team had, at the time, and it still may be, they had the most first-round draft picks of any team. They were loaded. But anyway, that was a very good team in 04. You talked about Bryce Young. I think his injury is worse than they're letting on. And if he does play, you had the operative question: how effective will he be? Because remember, even though you go and look, but when Alabama was in trouble against Auburn, when they were in trouble in big games, he would bring them back with his feet, with his arm. I mean, he looks like a point guard on grass. He looks like a basketball player directing the offense. But a lot of that has to do with his athletic ability, his ability to run. Now he's not going to run, not because his legs are injured, but because he can't risk further injury if he does even play. Now, last time Tennessee came into this series unbeaten, 1998, they won 35-18. But when you look at Tennessee's, going back to the theme of let's see it and then we'll believe it, Tennessee's two biggest rivals, Alabama and Georgia, the last 11 times they played these two programs, they're 0-11, losing by an average of 31 points per game. And I know this team's better. And we talk about Hendon Hooker. He was a blip on the radar, if that, when he was at Virginia Tech. So you got to give Josh Heupel some credit, because Hooker gets all the credit, but Heupel's done a great job developing that young man. Took a look at Tennessee's most recent wins in the series, 2006. iPhones, Uber, Instagram, none of them existed. This year, they're only a 7-point dog. And for good and bad, a lot of the public is on Tennessee in this spot. I don't like to be aligned with the public here, but I'm going to think Alabama's going to win, maybe not cover.
Mike, you talk about Bryce Young, and again, you're spot on. I thought the same thing. Is, he can run, but if he runs and he takes one good pop on that shoulder, then he's done for the day. And that is part of his. To me, that's the most electric part of his game, is where he's got a linebacker or a safety that's trying to spy on him, and he gets his receivers running downfield. They're only getting a 3 or 4 man rush. He's got time. The field spreads out. All of a sudden, he breaks through a gap. He makes that one guy that's shadowing him miss, and he's off to the races. And he's going to be very limited in that aspect on Saturday. Again, if he even plays at all. Now, there's one thing that this will cause an Alabama's fan, their heads to explode. If they
that doesn't take much.
Yeah, if they think about this. Could we be looking in the SEC East at shades of back, what was it, 11, when LSU comes in to Tuscaloosa? They beat Alabama, but Alabama doesn't go to the SEC championship game, but ends up winning the national championship. Think about this scenario. Let's just say that Tennessee beats Alabama, but they lose to Georgia, run the table the rest of the way. They're probably still going to get into the playoffs.
Yeah, they could. And here's another scenario. Let's say Tennessee, there's a chance for these teams to play 3 times.
True.
Because they're going to play this one on Saturday. They could play in the SEC championship and could play for a 3rd time and have the rubber match in the college football playoff.
If they split 1-1, regular season SEC championship game, much like Georgia and Alabama, last year, it was a situation where now again, it was SEC championship and then the playoffs. But again, I guess this would be the very first time that 2 teams played 3 times in a season, wouldn't it? We've had it where they played twice, but never where they played 3 times in a season.
Right. So right now we're giving bulletin board material to Georgia if they want to, because look, you can't forget about Georgia. They're a tough out. Yeah. And but mathematically and reality is if the winner of this game, I mean these 2 teams could play for a 3rd time if they both end up with 1 loss.
Now, Mike, we talked about making an Alabama fan's head explode. How would you like to make every other college football fan outside of 3 teams head explode, and somehow things work out where you have 3 SEC teams in the college football playoffs, Alabama, Georgia, and Tennessee? Oh, there would be a revolt like we've never seen. All right,
well, there's already tremendous SEC fatigue. And even though Clemson wasn't in it last year, they've been in it 6 of 8 times. The Clemson fatigue and SEC fatigue, I think there would be a revolt.
I agree with you wholeheartedly. Let's move out to the Big 12. No doubt that TCU and Kansas have been the surprise teams in the nation this year. How well they've played. They've again, Kansas lost last week for the first time to TCU, but both of these teams I think are very solid football teams. They have a good foundation. They're not flashes in the pan. Number 8, Oklahoma State taking on number 13 TCU there in Fort Worth tomorrow. You have to tip the hat to Sonny Dykes. After 22 seasons under Gary Patterson, where TCU was a defensive grounded football team. And I mean by that is their team was built around defense. And the offensive job was, hey, you don't get us beat. Defense will take care of everything. You do what you need to do. You don't have to win the game. You just don't have to lose the game. Well, under Sonny Dykes, listen, it's changed. Now it is an offensive first philosophy, and defense is, hey, get us some turnovers and don't let them score too quick. And the Frogs, they bought into this. You can tell this team has bought into that philosophy. And you have to go back and you look at where it all starts, and that's at the quarterback position with Max Duggan, 14 touchdowns, only 1 interception. And then on the flip side with the Oklahoma State Cowboys, Spencer Sanders, who, again, one of those guys who seems like he's been playing there since 1980, 12 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. You put these two teams up next to each other, and it's almost like looking in a mirror. They're both averaging 46 points per game. Oklahoma State is giving up 1 more point on defense versus TCU. If you look at the average yards on offense and defense, no significant difference there. And everyone wants to talk about Sonny Dykes. We've talked about him first year, what he's done there in Fort Worth. But let's talk about Mike Gundy for just a second. And I know everybody likes to go back to I'm a man, I'm 40 video. And I think that's one of the greatest things a coach has ever done in a press conference. It's cost him one of those press members out that was writing BS about his kids. He took over in 2005. He's only had 1 losing season. That's his first year. He's won 154 games. That's over 9+ a season. He's the all-time winningest coach at Oklahoma State. The knock on Gundy, of course, is 3-14 against Oklahoma. But you go back and you look at the history of the Oklahoma State series. You look at Bedlam. Listen, Gundy's beaten Oklahoma more than any other Oklahoma State coach. And it's not like every year since 2005 that Oklahoma's been ground chuck. They've had some very good football teams at Oklahoma. So, again, I like the Cowboys in this. I think they'll give TCU their first loss. But regardless, and TCU could very well win this football game, would not surprise me. And whether the Cowboys win, whether the Cowboys lose, Mike Gundy and that program overall, what he's done there, I think it's greatly underappreciated.
Agreed. The trends and some of the angles lean to the underdog. Oklahoma State, 15-5-1 against the spread their last 21 games, so they are undervalued. The market undervalues them. Underdogs covered 6 of 7 in this series, but the home team has covered 4 straight, so those trends cancel out. We talked about Tennessee being a trendy public dog. So is Oklahoma State. I don't generally like to be aligned with that. But also some other games this week, Penn State, Tennessee, and USC. The public all seems to like those dogs. Usually they don't do that well. I'm not looking at – when I look at this game, I look at the point spread. And TCU is a 3.5-point favorite. Not 3, not 2.5. Oklahoma State solid. We had them against Baylor in their game against Baylor. We respect Oklahoma State, but the point spread is telling me that TCU is going to win this game. So I'll have a small lean to the Horned Frogs.
Mike, let's move on to our picks of the week. We both went 2-0 last week. We're 8-2 combined for the year. Both of us 4-1. I'll start out and let's look at LSU and Florida. Florida is going to be a 2.5-point favorite in the Swamp. Neither one of these teams are ranked. Really, not what we've used to in the past. When you look at this series, usually they're playing each other and they're both ranked, and it's an important game as far as national and conference implications. It's not that this year, but it's still Florida and LSU. I think this game is going to come down to game management skills. Billy Napier has had some questionable decisions, some head scratchers at best. Now, Brian Kelly, and I'm speaking from a coach's standpoint, with all his faults, even though some fans have questioned his game management since he's been at LSU, like last week against Tennessee. Listen, he knew right before the half, yeah, he could have kicked the field goal and he could have got that to a one-possession game. And in certain situations, I agree with that. But there's no book. It's sort of like the analytics. But throw that crap out the window. You better have a feel for what's going on in the game. Brian Kelly knew that his best chance to stay up with Tennessee was to score touchdowns, because he was not going to win that football game kicking field goals. He's smart enough to see what's going on the other side. And so, again, a lot of the armchair quarterbacks, they were questioning, oh, well, he should have done this, he should have done that. Had Tennessee not been so electric on offense, then, yeah, I get that. But for all his faults, and Brian Kelly's got plenty, and
who doesn't?
Yeah, exactly. But including his Cajun accent, it's Southern Cajun accent. But game management, you go back and look at his time at Notre Dame and everything, game management is not one of his faults. Mike, you're a numbers guy, so I'm going to get on the numbers bandwagon here. The series is 33-32-3. I'm going to say LSU wins in the Swamp, and then we have 33-33-3. So that's what I'm looking at on all three series here. So I like LSU to go into the Swamp and take care of business, and LSU is my pick of the week.
Okay. That's a point spread leans to LSU there because Florida's only favored 2.5. You talked about Brian Kelly. So go back to 2012, actually 2013, when Notre Dame played Alabama. You you read and you hear what he said before that game. And he knew it, right? He said before the game, he said, hey, we can't let their big backs get on our safeties. Mm-hmm. And that's what happened. And, he knew he just didn't have the horses to win that game. So he's a great coach, and people can say what you want about his antics and so forth, but he's a solid coach. That's why I played them over 6.5 wins. Okay. So my pick of the week, I don't have a lot of trends. Frankly, a lot of the trends counteract in this matchup, but you have Arkansas going out to Brigham Young. I've been handicapping for 29 years, and it's hard to get rid of habits. And one of the go-tos that I look at is when you go across country in the middle of the football season, or basketball for that matter, and you play out of conference. Plus, you look at Arkansas. They've had 3 really tough games, physically, mentally, emotionally. Now they got to go out and play. I know it means something to the fans, but as far as the standings, it means nothing. Then you have Brigham Young. They have grown men, 25-year-old men that are playing on defensive and offensive lines. I'm going to go with Brigham Young here just because it's a good spot for the Cougars and a bad spot for the Hogs.
Mike, I told an audience on a show I was on earlier this week that this is a tipping point for the season, not for the program, but a tipping point for the season for both of these teams, because I think whichever team wins is going to end up progressing and having a good season, an 8-4 type season. And the team that loses, I don't see them finishing above 500. And emotionally, once your kids check out, season's over with. And that could happen in both of, for both of these teams this week.
Yeah, and that's one thing as a handicapper, you have to be able to identify those situations When a team is checked out mentally, they're saying all the right things, but you see their performance on the court or on the field. And once you know they've checked out, you have to factor that in.
Mike, we appreciate your time as always on Friday morning. And we're going to give you tomorrow off. But before you start your NFL duties we're going to give you're not off, but we're going to give you tomorrow off.
Well, I was about to say 14-hour days doesn't seem like an off day.
Yeah, but we're going to be gracious and not take up any of your time tomorrow. And but Sunday morning before you start your NFL duties, we are going to require that you come back on and review with us, because we always enjoy doing that.
Yeah, I enjoyed today, and I look forward to Sunday morning.